Hello, I'm going to talk today about the topic of bibliotherapy. This was a topic that really hit home with me during this course. It is something that I really connected to and that I feel very passionate about taking into my future classroom as an elementary school teacher. And I think it's something that you could use if you're not a teacher, if you are a teacher, if you're a student. Bibliotherapy is not a word I was familiar with, but it is something I have used throughout my whole life. And it's something I'd really like to introduce others to. So I'm going to talk about what I learned about it through this course and hopefully inspire you to take it into your classroom or into your day-to-day life. So just kind of starting about what bibliotherapy is. So really it's old. It came from the ancient Greeks through the idea of, building libraries as a place of gathering and community. So if you think about, community and relationship and connection as healing, they built these centers, these buildings that were just filled with books as a place to come together, to share ideas, to build connections, to build relationships. So I think, even though it wasn't called bibliotherapy at the time, it has always been around, always. So I got to experience, how I would use a text like Fox Magic as a bibliotherapy tool in a middle grade classroom. That novel talks about everything from suicide, bullying, abuse, trauma, family structure. It goes through a wide range of difficult topics that can be hard to bring up in classrooms and that teachers are, have fear around. So that's what I really love about bibliotherapy is that it can help take away some of that fear because it's not necessarily all on you as the teacher to, provide examples and to kind of initiate those conversations. You can lean on the literature. You are still the one, facilitating. The literature is almost like a second teacher in that respect. So that's something I really connected to as well. The biggest thing that really stuck with me was the idea about literature providing windows for some students and mirrors for others. And I'll touch on that a little bit more, but that's one of the biggest impacts this topic had for me. So yeah, overall, I think that it can be used as a therapeutic tool to teach health outcomes really in any grade from K to 12 and beyond school. I think bibliotherapy can be a tool that can help people as individuals move through hard times in their life or even just through the day to day. But I'm going to mostly specifically focus on how you can use it to teach health outcomes in your middle grade or K to 12 classroom. So my first focus I want to talk about is a topic that was introduced to me through the Crawley article. And that article was from 2020, and it's the If I Knew Then What I Do Now, Fostering Pre-Service Teachers' Capacity to Promote Expansive and Critical Conversation with Children's Literature. So this article is the one that introduced the windows and mirror analogy, the metaphor. And something Crawley mentioned in the beginning of his article that was really powerful for me was reframing how we as educators talk about hard conversations and not calling them necessarily hard or difficult because that gives them that negative connotation, but switching it to, critical conversations, like these kinds of conversations around health outcomes, suicide, bullying, poverty, family structure, gender and sexual orientation. These critical conversations are so important to have with students because it's going to come up. There's no way of avoiding it. There's going to be students in the midst of some of those. And it's not something we can avoid, even though it might feel uncomfortable and difficult to discuss and bring up as an educator. It's essential that we do. So using books, like for example, Fox Magic, to bring up those topics in the classroom, and then using that as, a guide for your lesson planning, for your classroom structure, to introduce those conversations and those topics naturally through that literature is something that I really, really thought that was great. Something that brought up then thinking about having those conversations and using the literature to facilitate them was the importance, and we talked a lot about this in class with Judy, checking in on your own wellness first. These are as we had called them before, these are can be difficult and hard conversations, but they are critical to have. So that means that you need to be, as an educator, in a good spot mentally, physically, holistically, to facilitate those for the students. So checking in with your own wellness, your mental health, knowing your triggers and your biases, those are really important so that you can show up as your best self and you can be prepared to handle the emotions that the students might be feeling as well, and that you're not getting triggered or overwhelmed or then have to step back. Being able to be present in those conversations can't be done if you're not healthy. So I think that was a big takeaway for me, for sure. I think this also comes down to, what we learned a lot about in Perry and Oprah's book, What Happened to You. That book talked a lot about the sense of belonging. And I think that, if you're going to use bibliotherapy and the literature to facilitate critical conversations around topics like this, around health topics in a classroom, you want students to feel safe when you're having those conversations. And I think that's done through building that sense of belonging, and building that successful classroom relationship, creating that comfort and that sense of safety in your classroom community is also going to be such a big help to you in having those conversations. It's going to set the tone, it's going to set the comfort level. By having those strong relationships, you're going to know, what literature to choose, what topics to introduce. That's all kind of based on your students as well. I also think one more touch on that is, you know, as educators, we are modeling, we have to model um, these conversations. So to show what it looks like to have them in a healthy manner is going to allow students to go forward and continue to have those conversations in and outside of the classroom, because they're going to see how their teacher handled it in a professional, healthy way. And I think that's really key as well. So again, just kind of to wrap that section up, we're using literature to introduce these topics in kind of the health realm, that are deemed, difficult and hard to have, but are critical to have. And they can be kind of the source of how we organize the conversations, how we facilitate them, and they're going to be, I think, the greatest support tool for sure. And again, these conversations can be integrated into the lesson plans. So the next part I wanted to touch on was using bibliotherapy to teach to health outcomes. So we kind of touched on that already, but I wanted to really narrow in specifically on how you choose the literature to help teach your health topics. So I'm going to use the book that I read this term as an example. So if I wanted to teach a topic on bullying and I had all these different, resources, I would look at Fox Magic by Beverly Brenna, and I would try and, see what the central themes are. That's kind of the main thing you want to look at. What is this book trying to say? Is the book characterized by its teaching intent, like some books are? Um, was this recommended by any other, you know, educational bibliographies, by other teachers? You kind of look at that as well. Who is the author? I know, for example, Beverly Brenna is an educator, so that's kind of an indicator there that it's a great resource. You want to look at if the story fits the feelings and the needs and the goals of your classroom and your classroom outcomes. So, if you're teaching about bullying, what are you wanting to show? Are you wanting to model how to healthily cope and overcome? Do you want to show strategies to prevent? What health do you want to promote healthy relationships and what those look like? That if you want to see kind of how you want to teach and how you want to frame the teaching around it and go from there. So looking at Fox Magic, the book deals a lot with, it shows a lot of intense bullying, and it does show, some unhealthy strategies, but at the end it does showcase healthy community building, healthy relationships at the end, to show kind of how to overcome bullying. So I think in that regard, if that's what I was going to teach, I would totally use Fox Magic as an example, and to teach to the health outcomes within the frame of bullying and healthy relationships. I think that would be a great resource. Um, you can use the literature to introduce your topics. You can teach, your health outcomes entirely around your text, your novel, whatever you choose. For example, I'm going to bring Fox Magic up again, but it has more than just bullying in the subject matter. It talks about suicide, so that's a huge one. So that's something you could delve into through that text. It shows family structure, so you could go through the different kinds of family units, different kinds of family structures through that. And I think one of the biggest ones is healthy relationships. The book does a good job of showing unhealthy and healthy relationships. And I think you can use the text to identify the two with students. I think that would be really powerful. And I think really important, especially in those middle years. It's kind of like a really formative time when we're learning how to make friendships and how to make healthy friendships, long-lasting friendships. So definitely a tool and a resource that I would recommend. Something that I would personally recommend, and this is kind of just from my general experience and what I've learned through my course of studying the past couple years. I think that offering choice for students is huge. And I think we talked about this in class where it was like, it's the you're offering choice, but you're choosing the choices as the teacher. So I think this is an important kind of pedagogy to use when choosing your literature to study and to teach the health outcomes. If you know what health outcomes you want to teach, pre-choose a couple of texts, few different ones that you think would be enjoyed by your students, useful to your students, and then give them the choice. Let them vote, which ones they want to choose, which ones do they feel most connected to. That's going to give your class a sense of agency. They're going to be more engaged, and they're going to be, I think, more excited to learn because they got to choose that with you, and it wasn't necessarily like forced upon them. And I do also think that would make, those critical conversations that you're going to have throughout teaching those health outcomes more approachable and easier because, your students knew what text they were choosing, they knew what topics you were going to discuss, and you can go from there. So I think that's really important. Um, so yeah, just to kind of sum that part up, I just think that books like Fox Magic can be not only like really impactful and educational, but they can be life-saving and they can teach life-saving skills to your students and could be really helpful. Um, I think even as like a new teacher, if you're like fresh out of university or if you've been in the game for a long time, I think especially as a new teacher, use the resources that are out there. And there's so many good literature resources like Fox Magic that I would highly recommend to help teach those health outcomes, especially if you're nervous or uncertain, lean on the literature. That would be my biggest recommendation. Okay, so the last topic I wanted to touch on was the biggest takeaway for me through researching deeper into bibliotherapy, and that is using literature, specifically fiction, to provide a mode for students to see themselves, to provide empathy and awareness. And Crawley says it best in his article, books can be windows for some children and mirrors for others. So what this means is that, if a student hasn't really experienced hardship, or hasn't, experienced the hardship that maybe you're teaching on in your lesson and your health outcome, that book, the literature that you're choosing is going to be a window for them into that. It's going to help them build empathy around, someone going through that hardship. In the Mirror's case, that book, that hardship that the characters are going through provides a mirror for a student that has gone through something similar. So for them, they're going to feel seen, they're going to feel heard, they're going to get that sense that, they're not alone. And the biggest thing, and that depends on the literature that you choose, but it can provide an example of how to healthily move through those hardships. So I think for me, that's the biggest impact of bibliotherapy is either seeing yourself reflected back in a character or seeing something that you haven't experienced and, being able to empathize. I think that is just huge. And I don't think it's can be done better than with fiction, to be honest. It's really, really impactful. So yeah, this literature, it's a way for students to connect with something bigger than themselves. And it provides a mode of connection with the world when things feel difficult and when things feel scary, and maybe you don't have a safe adult at home to turn to. Who do you talk to about these things? Well, there's characters in these books that you can, feel comforted with. This is a quote that I got from, this was Sevinc's article. It touched more on the psychiatric uses of bibliotherapy. It was more of a clinical take. But this quote just hit home for me. And he says, whether one is alone, a book is a good friend. And I think that says it all. Books are there when we maybe don't have physical people around us to turn to. So another big point when we're talking about the literature, when we're talking about providing these mirrors and these windows and feeling empathy, this is when, the whole talk about representation comes into play. And this is, again, huge. Students can't see themselves reflected if they're not reflected in the literature. So if you're using books that just show white nuclear families, with like heterosexual parents, you're only reflecting a certain demographic of students. So, looking beyond maybe, classic literature, looking to modern literature, seeing more diverse examples of family structure, cultural diversity, sexual orientation, broadening that scope so that you're providing more windows and more mirrors for students. So I think that's really huge. So be critical about the books you choose, be open-minded about the books you choose, and look wide and far. There's so many resources out there, and we have the tools to search for them. So I would just say be curious and look as far as you can for what you need. And then again, this is going to come back to something we talked a lot about in class, and this is the pushback that you might get when you choose certain texts. So if you are choosing a text that talks about, I'm going to go back to the topic of suicide and bullying, just because that's what I read in Fox Magic. A text like that might be scary for parents to hear that their kids are reading, and admin might be wary about you teaching text. So this is something we talked about in class. It's just being prepared. So if you know that, this text is going to teach this outcome and this outcome, and this is the benefit it's going to have, it's going to help the students in this way and in that way, just be prepared, have it written. Have it communicate with the parents first, before your students go home and tell their parents the book that they're reading. Communicate up front. And I think that's really the biggest thing is if you're prepared and you are strong and confident in why you're teaching the resource and you have reasons and data to back you up, then you just got to share that with your parents and your admin, and I think then you're in the clear. Just be prepared to have those conversations. And again, that comes back to being healthy in your own right as a teacher, taking care of yourself, making sure you're prepared to have those conversations is really important. To kind of sum that up, I just personally, I think that books are life-changing. They have been life-changing for me, and I think, this is probably 75% of the reason that I am in education is because I love books and I love reading and I love literature, and it saved my life more than once in many ways. And I want to be a facilitator and kind of like a gateway to introduce kids to books, to get kids falling in love with reading again. And, never mind all the literacy skills and all the critical thinking and everything else that comes with reading, empathy, providing that example, creating connection, community, relationship, that's the power of books. And I think bibliotherapy is a tool that every teacher should consider, especially when teaching health outcomes. Again, looking at books like Fox Magic to teach those hard subjects and to facilitate those critical conversations with students. You're creating a safe space. You're providing resources and tools for students to turn to. And I think overall, you're just being a great teacher by using this amazing tool that I learned so much more about in this class. And just, yeah, overall, I think this will benefit future students, teachers, and anyone outside of the education, system. It's an amazing tool that I think everyone should get on board with. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you go home and pick up a book. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.